Hi, and welcome back to the Business Career College video series. In this video, we're going to look at our various provincial disability supports programs. Now, this is not a presentation that lends itself to a full amount of detail, and instead what we're going to do here is we're just going to go over some basic understanding of what the various provincial disability supports programs look like. So, in order to at least establish what we're talking about here, we'll start with looking at what is probably the best known of the provincial disability supports programs, and this is ODSP, or the Ontario Disability Supports Program. And what happens under ODSP is that disabled adults will receive potentially a monthly income. They may receive health benefits. They may receive certain assisted living arrangements. They may receive some supplemental benefits like access to recreation facilities in the city they live in, or access to transit passes, or so forth. It's actually a fairly substantial range of stuff. So in order to qualify for ODSP, we're looking at a disabled adult between the ages of 18 to 65 who has generally low income and low assets. Now, most provinces have some sort of provision for this, but what we have to be aware of is that there are substantial differences between the provinces. So I'll go over some of the different provincial plans in a moment here, but here's what you're looking for in terms of what the program offers. And sometimes this is under an umbrella of programs, and sometimes you have one program that offers all of these services. So depending on the province you're in, you may have some ability to generate some income or to have income available here. Depending on the province you're in, you may have access to some sort of health care. Now, what often happens here is you may be moved off the provincial system or off the default provincial system, and you may move on to a specific healthcare system that's set up just for people on AISH, or sometimes it's coupled with social assistance or welfare in that province. You may have access to some sort of a supplement for assisted living or long-term care facilities or something like that. So end up in a group home or something with some stipend to help take care of that. And that varies quite a bit among the provinces. You may have access to recreational facilities, city attractions and that kind of thing, sometimes at a discounted price or sometimes as a free service. You may have access to different types of healthcare and employment resources. Possibly even some entrepreneurship programs. So granting, coaching, that kind of thing. Lots of different stuff that could be available. It's not saying that this is going to be available in every province. In fact, there are substantial differences from province to province. So what are probably the most generous programs, the programs that stand alone and do tend to provide a monthly income, would be Ontario's ODSP. Saskatchewan has SED, that's Saskatchewan Assistance, Saskatchewan assisted income for the disabled. Alberta has AISH, which is assured income for the severely handicapped. And PEI actually, curiously, has a program, and that's its DSP, Disability Supports Program. And then you have programs that are basically supplemental to social assistance. So in other provinces, you can still have some fairly decent benefits, but generally these are going to be supplemental to whatever the social assistance program is. And sometimes you'd have, so basically you qualify for a welfare, and then based on qualifying for welfare, you would have the ability to maybe access a little bit of an extra supplement. So for example, Manitoba has a program that provides a $100 per month supplement to your basic program offered under its social assistance. So in order to qualify for these programs, we're generally looking at somebody who has a long-term disability that renders them unable to work. And what we find here, oh, and sorry, I should mention, the approximate amount of income benefit, when you do have income benefits, they're going to be in the neighborhood of around $1,000 to maybe as much as $1,400 per month. So they're not a huge amount of income. They're designed just to provide a little bit of steady income here to help this person have at least some basic financing available, some basic funds available. Now, we have some testing that has to happen here. So in addition to being disabled, there's also the requirement here that you meet, and this is pretty standard across the provinces, that you meet an asset test and that you meet an income test. And these asset and income tests, basically they say, depending on exactly how much you're doing here, how much income you have, you could lose access to these benefits, or you could lose access to the income portion of these benefits. So when you're doing any sort of planning, and we'll have a separate video on planning for disabled persons, but when you're doing any sort of planning for a disabled person, you have to consider, is this going to put them offside for their disability supports? And sometimes that's not the worst thing. If this person's going to have so much income and assets on their own that they don't need these disability supports plans anymore, hey, that's not that big a deal. But if they're sort of just on the cusp, then you may want to put in place appropriate planning for this. So on the asset test side, we generally are looking at as low as about $5,000 of assets up to about $100,000 of assets. And $100,000 is what is allowed in Alberta. $5,000 is pretty common in other provinces. Ontario, for example, has a $5,000 threshold. That is, if you have more than $5,000 in assets, with certain exceptions, then you're going to lose your benefits. And exceptions here vary, but exceptions can include a registered disability savings plan. In some provinces, assets held in a trust may be exempted depending on how the trust is set up, and we may find pension amounts, not an RRSP or a RIF, but rather a pension or a LIF or LIRA. Don't count on all of these exceptions. They vary by province. The provinces all have some sort of indication as to what's going to qualify and what's not. And in a moment, I will provide a listing of different resources by province to help research this for each particular jurisdiction. Income tests vary quite a bit as well. Income tests, you're going to tend to see some sort of clawback starting maybe at around $1,000 of monthly income. And probably you'll lose all of your benefits if you can make more than about $2,000 a month on your own. It does vary, and there is some situational difference here. We generally accept any RDSP income, that is, if you're drawing funds from an RDSP. The giant exception to that is Quebec. Quebec, I should have mentioned this earlier, sorry, Quebec actually has a substantially different disability supports program called RAMQ, La Régie de l'Assurance Maladie de Québec. Promise not to speak any more French, but there you go. And this program, it looks quite a bit different from other provincial disability supports programs. It's actually a very broad program, and it provides benefits in a great deal more circumstances, except it's not actually going to give any exception for RDSP assets. So you have to be careful with that in Quebec. Now, before I go and show the different provincial disability supports programs resources, I'll mention one more thing. So the reason we have such vast differences between provinces as far as these plans go is because they really are up to provincial jurisdiction. This is not like workers' compensation, for example, where we have a set of national standards and then the provinces all adhere to that. This is really completely its own set of rules, and each province is free to put in place rules or not without any requirement to adhere to any sort of federal regulation or to look like how any other province does anything. So now let's have a look at a list of resources that are available for each province to help understand or to help you research maybe for your particular province what the provisions that are in place are. So a quick Google search for any of these resources will generally, for the province name and then the term disability supports or disability income or maybe disability benefits, will generally yield this resource for you, but I will make sure that this handout is available to anybody who's doing this as a continuing education class through Business Career College. Other than that, you can see the links here. Unfortunately, within YouTube, there's a limitation here where we can't make these clickable links, but hopefully this does give you an idea. Anyways, every province has a pretty good guide somewhere that describes its various provincial disability supports. One thing that I find is that advisors tend to grossly underestimate the likelihood that somebody actually needs these benefits. You may have a client and they may not specifically use these benefits, but it's very common that they would have adult disabled children who might use these benefits, maybe a sibling, a niece or nephew, an aunt or uncle, maybe their parents. So it is worth getting to know the disability supports program for your particular province. And I showed in the video some of the typical provisions that we see around that, some of the things that you can watch for when you're researching the particular disability supports program that's available in the jurisdiction in which you're resident. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this gives you an idea about maybe an idea that we don't explore enough or a concept we don't explore enough, which are these provincial disability supports programs. They are widely used and they can form a very important part of putting together any sort of plan for a disabled person. I hope that you found this useful and enjoy your continued studies. Thank you.